Hey guys, welcome to our study of World War II. This chapter actually is broken down into two separate vodcasts. The first vodcast will be obviously this one, the events that take place in Europe and Asia, and how World War II gets started over there, as well as looking at the American foreign policy while all of that was going on. The second vodcast will be about America's involvement in World War II itself. So let's go ahead and get started, taking a look at the objectives. You can see I've made this diagram to give the impression that everything kind of starts out real big and channels down and funnels down to the result of war itself and American involvement, which we'll get to in just a bit. Our foreign policy at the time in the 1930s was to defeat or contain the radical states, but really not to get involved. We exercised a policy of neutrality, which we enjoyed, especially after World War I. And due to the Great Depression that was going on in the United States and the world, the American opinion was that we did not need to get involved in any kind of foreign entanglements again, because we had our own issues to deal with. So in Europe, all this mess is happening, and the United States is just kind of standing by and watching it take place, trying to ignore it because, again, we were dealing with our own issues. In 1922, Mussolini rises up and marches down the main streets of Italy, Rome, wherever he was, and essentially takes control by force of the Italian government. In 1933, we see the rise of Hitler. Hitler was involved in World War I as a small-time, private or whatever the rank he had in the German army. He gets mixed up in the beer hall revolt, gets blamed for a lot of it. Spends his time in jail, writes his famous book. When he gets out, the people of Germany are looking for a leader, and he basically takes over that role because he's the one that has the answers, and the people are looking for answers to their questions. In Japan, we see a similar move, except for the fact that there's no taking over of the government. The emperor is still considered the god king, and the people of Japan, despite their weakness, would not stand for the fact that the emperor would be usurped of his power. So the military does take over, and they claim to be acting in the name of the emperor, and the emperor himself really is kind of powerless to stop it. Japan makes the first move in 31, or makes their first move in 31, and takes over the territory of Manchuria, renames it Manchukuo, and the United States says, no, don't do any more of that. Jumping back to Europe, Mussolini claims to have been insulted by the military powerhouse that was Ethiopia. Many of you may not know this, but Ethiopia was super strong. Of course, I'm joking. They had nothing to compare or to compete against Italy, but Mussolini, in an attempt to keep the people of Italy happy, claims to have been insulted by the king and the people of Ethiopia, and is going to use military force, military aggression to enact a revenge upon that insult. When Mussolini took over, Italy obviously was in a bad state as well, and when he came to power, he claimed that he would return Italy to its once great state, the days of the Caesar, and how much land that Italy and Rome had amassed. He promised to return that, and for several years, he took over in 31. For several years, he did nothing, and so the people start to question that, and there start to be little murmurings and mumblings going on, and so he has to do something to keep the people happy, to keep the people content. So he creates this fake event and literally destroys Ethiopia, and as he should. I mean, Italy has a well-advanced military in comparison to the spears and the wooden shields of Ethiopia. Ethiopia had one plane, by the way, and it was for the king's use. Going against the Treaty of Versailles, Germany does rearm. Hitler claims that the Treaty of Versailles has no bearing, no impact. It's basically defunct. He doesn't even recognize it. He claims that the leaders of Germany actually didn't sign it. Regardless of all that, he does rearm Germany, and does withdrawal from the League of Nations in 1935. He reoccupies the area of Germany known as the Rhineland, which takes him right up against the borders of France and Belgium. And Germany and Italy, Hitler and Mussolini, sign an agreement, sign a peace pact, and form the Axis countries. Famous quote from Hitler: "Today Germany, tomorrow the world." Again, just showing his disrespect for the leaders of Europe and the Treaty of Versailles following World War I. Japan continues its invasion of China, moving into mainland China in 1937. Again, the United States, not wanting to get involved, but shakes their finger and wrinkles their brow very sternly at Japan, says, now, don't do any more. Roosevelt not willing to do anything because he's dealing with his own issues, economic issues at home. Again, the American foreign policy. A Gallup poll of American citizens in 1939 was taken, 84%. And again, this is after the war has started. 84% of the Americans believe the allied countries of England and France and Russia will defeat the Axis countries of Japan, Germany, and Italy. There is a small percentage in the country that believe Germany will win, and these are mostly made up of German Americans. But another question being asked, do you favor getting involved? And a majority of the opinions, easy majority of opinion claim they want no involvement, none at all. Back to Europe. Hitler continues to reclaim parts of Germany. He claims all of Austria and a piece of Czechoslovakia that contains probably 90% Germans. He says they are Germans, they belong to the mother country, and he also claims that they want to be returned. This is the area of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, and this area happens to be very mountainous. So in effect, what Hitler is doing is claiming this land as a right because they're Germans and Germans want to be there. But in reality, what he was doing is taking over the land, removing the natural barrier of the mountain ranges, so that he would have easy access east to attack Poland later on. Germany and Russia do sign a non-aggression treaty. Russia recognizes what Hitler is trying to do, and in an attempt to appease him, this is a word that's going to be used for many, many years by the wonderful Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. In an attempt to appease Hitler, Russia decides to sign this non-aggression pact. We agree not to attack you. You agree not to attack us. We agree not to jump in with anyone who attacks you. Non-aggression pact. And instantly, after the signing, Germany invades Poland, and Russia, with the non-aggression pact, stands by and watches it happen because they agree not to help anyone who attacks Germany or tries to stand up against Germany. In this case, Poland tried to, but there's no help from Russia because of the non-aggression pact. The war does begin in 1939. All of the appeasement tactics by England and France and Russia obviously don't work. They should have realized they didn't work. They were dealing with a madman, a genius, but a madman nonetheless. And so finally, after realizing that no matter how much you're willing to compromise, Hitler's always going to ask for more, war is declared. And the United States, again, does help its allies, but remains neutral for the most part. Germany, very aggressive. United States, because of our location, because of the oceans that we have surrounding our country, sees no immediate reason to be involved, no immediate danger. If somebody was going to attack us, it would take a massive movement overseas, and we would see that coming and have time to prepare. But they do start paying attention. They start to have a little watchful eye. They start to watch a little more closely. And we do start a situation of preparedness. Why? Why do we do this? Why do we remain neutral? Right there, the Great Depression. As I stated before, we have our own problems. Most Americans, our immediate problems, our own financial worries. It's Europe's problem. Let Europe deal with it. And then future problems, another reason why the United States citizens did not want to be involved and why the United States government did not get involved right away. If we do get involved, they believed with European affairs we'd be too tied into their affairs. Neutrality and isolation would never again be possible. We attempted isolation following World War I, and it resulted in World War II, essentially. So a lot of Americans, again, prefer isolation. just like in World War I, but more so in World War II, many Americans believe that those pushing for war, those wanting for war, were the bankers. They believe that the only reason they want to go to war is because of the war machine, the war industries that they could improve upon, or rather the business production, the war business would increase sales. And it's basically the only reason they want to go to war is to line their pockets. That's what many Americans believe. So what actions did the United States take? Starting in 1936, we do start, or we see the Neutrality Acts again, 3 years of neutral activity, no sales loans to any foreign country. We do protect, no, we offer no protection for Americans living in war zones either, which is something new because we really just did not want to get involved. That's how vehemently we protested and wanted to stay out of that. In 1937, we began a policy of cash and carry. What this means is that if England wants material from us, they can come to the United States and pay cash for the items. But they have to come and pick it up in their own ships. We're not going to give you any kind of convoy system. We're not going to give you any kind of protection overseas. We're not going to take it to you and expose our ships to the German submarines, the U-boats. So if you want help from the United States, if you want scrap metal, if you want iron, if you want steel, if you want oil, you come to us, come to our ports, pay cash for it, and we'll do business that way. Really no direct involvement. 1940, a year after the war has started, we have the destroyer deal. We lease 50 naval destroyers for 99 years to our allies on bases in Caribbean and Pacific, and we do finally, again, like I said earlier, we have a watchful eye on the events taking place in Europe. We start a peacetime draft of young men. Let's go back to that draft real quick. I'll talk about this again in the next vodcast, but the draft had to turn away so many men because of the effects of the Depression. And without wanting to get into it too far right now, there's just a serious case of malnutrition, and there were so many men turned away. If you've ever watched the movie Captain America, in the very first half hour, this young man wants to join the army, but he's so small, he's so thin, and that's that's all for Hollywood, but that's also reality. I mean, there were so many young men who were malnourished because of the Great Depression. They could not be seen fit for service. Hitler starts his blitzkrieg across Europe in 1940. This may be what prompts the destroyer deal from the United States. 1941, the U.S. moves forward, and we move from a policy of cash and carry to lend-lease. We will get goods to you. Our allies were so busy in the war that they could no longer come and pick things up, so we decided to carry out this policy of lend-lease. We will bring goods to you. We'll have a Navy escort. We'll take them to Iceland, and then you come and pick them up from there. And again, we see an undeclared naval war with Germany in 1941, and that's because our ships are now on the water escorting this merchandise, these products, to our allies. And then, of course, the famous day of infamy, December 7, 1941, when Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. Let's get into that right now. The attack on Pearl Harbor was just the tip of the iceberg, as you can see there. Japanese leaders, again, taking power in their own hands without overstepping their bounds with the emperor in the public's eye. Many Japanese citizens believe this is what the emperor wants, and so they do give their 100% support to the Japanese military. Japan, obsessed with being self-sufficient, and there's a reason for that, which we'll get to in just a second. Japan joins the Axis with Germany and Italy, and then they occupy China, as we've already seen. As a result of the occupation of mainland China in 1937, Congress places an embargo on scrap metal and oil that we were sending to Japan for their war machine. 75% of Japan's scrap metal or scrap iron was coming from the United States, and then you can see the oil and copper there. These are major items necessary for Japan to make and produce weapons of war. So that embargo leaves Japan with two choices. They can retreat, which is what the United States was really hoping would happen, or they can attack the United States and force us to lift the embargo. And as you know, through history, Japan decided to try to bully us and pound us into submission to lift the embargo. So the tip of the iceberg is what we just saw, and now here's the big problem. This all starts in 1850. Japan was a closed-off country to the world, and in 1850, Commodore Matthew Perry sails into Tokyo with 2 or 3 gunboats and sends a letter to the Japanese government, the Japanese emperor, and basically claims that they need to open up and trade with the United States or face our gunboats. Japan, realizing that they don't have the necessary means to fight off the United States at that time, agrees to the trade and opens up. But they also understand that if the United States is capable of doing these kinds of actions, then the rest of the world is not too far behind them. Japan realizes that industrialization and building up their military is the only way they're going to survive in this new world. And that's exactly what they do. Japan has this idea of becoming a superpower in that part of the world, and they get assistance from a fairly well-known American, Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt is probably the face, the picture of the Aryan movement. Not that he was racist. In fact, it's just the opposite. Roosevelt wasn't a racist, but he definitely believed in Anglo-Saxon superiority. The idea that the white race, the Caucasian race, is best suited to Christianize the heathen world. Roosevelt liked the Japanese. Roosevelt liked their style, liked their culture. He liked their work ethic because it mirrored some of his own. There was not anything that Roosevelt was afraid of, or there was not anything that he could not do with a little hard work, and that's essentially how the Japanese ran their lives and ran their culture. Roosevelt gives the Japanese the title of honorary Aryans, essentially giving them a free pass to Christianize or take over Asia, because he sees them as worthy of that title, just like Caucasians were worthy of taking over all of the English peninsula and all of England, and then moving across to what is now the United States and carrying out manifest destiny. He believed it was Japan's destiny to rule mainland Asia. And so, even though his cousin Franklin Roosevelt claims that Japan needs to give China back their sovereignty, Teddy Roosevelt obviously was kind of one of the big pushes for Japanese aggression. Roosevelt is also given a lot of credit for the Treaty of Portsmouth, the ending of the Russian-Japanese War. He actually won a Nobel Peace Prize for his actions on mediating the end of this war. In secret, though, Roosevelt makes it known that he was hoping that Japan would defeat Russia. But obviously that didn't happen. Despite Franklin Roosevelt's requests to pull out of China, Japan continues its aggression, and so the embargo remains. So that is the end of this section. Again, all the events that took place in Europe at the start of World War II, and the United States foreign policy at the beginning of World War II. And again, just a little bit of background information as to the relationship between the United States and Japan. Thanks, guys.